Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
Today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Jeremy Ebersol with me. He is the communication specialist for the Landmark Trust USA. So, Jeremy, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's really great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. My family is from your neck of the woods there in Lancaster County. But I grew up in Ohio, in Akron, Ohio, in kind of a suburban area of outside of Akron, an area that I remember had farm fields essentially across the street. There was an old house with a big farm behind it, and they burned the house as part of a controlled burn for the fire department, and then popping right up in its place was a large McMansion development.
Oh yeah, that happens.
Yes, it happens all over, and I think that was from my early interest in preservation, but kind of a suburban Ohio upbringing. Did my undergrad at Elizabethtown College in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, focusing on communications. And then worked actually my first career, as with many in this field, my first career was not preservation. In fact, I had no idea preservation existed in undergrad or as a child. Though knew I loved road trips and traveling to places that were interesting. But did my communications degree at Elizabethtown College for my undergrad. Worked at the college as an admissions counselor as my first career, and had a kind of a roundabout way of getting kind of to where I am now in preservation. I did a few years living internationally and traveling, backpacking, volunteering in Latin America, Israel, New Zealand, Germany, and came back after that experience to Lancaster, actually, Lancaster City, really interested in investing in a place that I was passionate about and more on fire than ever, I think, about preserving places.
From your international travels?
Yeah. Really connecting. And I had realized, again, as I was working at Elizabethtown in missions, which I loved, the part of that job that I liked the most was traveling and recruiting students from around the country and getting to see different interesting places. So kind of after I did that full-time volunteer service and came back to Lancaster, really wanted to dive into the preservation world, which I had just discovered kind of by chance, by hearing that there's an organization called the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and diving into what that exactly meant. Kind of in that journey, then I've had a number of steps since entering the preservation kind of world. I did some work. I had two SCA organizations in my background. One, the Student Conservation Association, where I did some work out in California with the National Park Service at the Mojave National Preserve, and then worked with the National Heritage Areas program in Philadelphia, doing communications for the Northeast region of the National Park Service with the National Heritage Areas program, which was just a fantastic kind of entree into kind of both preservation and kind of destination marketing and place-based heritage tourism-based development, and loved that position. Was able to transition that into a position with an actual national heritage area, and worked for the Essex National Heritage Commission. That's what brought me up to New England initially, where I am. Essex National Heritage Commission is the entire county of Essex County north of Boston, between Boston and Hampshire border there, and did communications there. And during that time, I got involved with the other SCA, the Society for Commercial Archaeology, on whose board I currently sit. And this is one of my big passions: is roadside architecture, commercial archaeology. They're based on the organization was founded in the late 1970s by Chester Leeds, who was running the University of Vermont Historic Preservation Department at the time, as a way to essentially bring attention to the value of roadside commercial resources.
So is it like motels, like the motor inns, and like all of those kind of like touristy stops too, or is it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the roads itself, and then all of those resources that are built up around it. So yes, motels, gas stations, movie theaters, and neon signs.
Oh, that's so much fun. So this is completely down a path. So I often say to my husband as we drive past these motor inns that, you know, my retirement plan is to buy one. I'll be the front desk person. He can be the maintenance guy, and we will run this roadside motel. He is against it. It probably won't happen, but as we
we need someone to be doing this. I know it crosses all of our minds.
Yeah, as we drove from Arizona to Pennsylvania at the spring, and we were driving through southern Colorado, and there were so many like neon signs still attached to the motel. Now the motel, some of the motels weren't still there, but I'm like, I love that sign, I love that. So I am also on your team.
Yeah, good. Yes. These are amazing. This was actually my graduate school thesis was on neon sign preservation. Yeah, certainly a passion of mine. And there are neon signs just about everywhere, and they're getting replaced too often with LED.
Oh yeah, I was very sad when I learned that. I was very sad that there are fake neon signs now.
Right. And they put neon in parentheses.
Yeah.
So I'm in the county. Better than no sign, but certainly not the same thing. And I have 300 pages that can tell you why. I'm interested in seeing that. But yeah, so I got involved with the Society for Commercial Archaeology. I'm still on the board there for the past decade or so. It's an amazing organization. We do tours and publications. So for any listeners who are interested in this area of research or interest, it's a really cool organization that kind of bridges the gap between kind of scholarship and enthusiasts of roadside. And then I ended up here in Vermont for a little bit, and then decided to finally make the jump and do grad school. So I did go out then to the University of Oregon in Portland. Okay. I had a little bit.
I have my grandfather graduated from there, and several of my cousins have. I did get accepted there, but I ended up not going. I didn't become a social worker. That's her. Yeah.
It was a fantastic program, and I just graduated in 2020, so I had a nice little gap of 13 years in between, and realized you forget a lot about how to be in school. Anyone thinking about grad school who's listening, I say, do it if you want, but do it earlier if you can. And that I graduated into the pandemic in 2020, and was really fortunate then kind of completing my long, hopefully not too long-winded trajectory. Graduated into the pandemic and was fortunate to get a position then as executive director, essentially the first executive director for the Milwaukee Preservation Alliance in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and that organization as the ED until just last year, and then made a transition here to my current position, working with the Landmark Trust USA in southeastern Vermont, a national organization but based here in southeastern Montana. Probably talk more about them as we.
Oh yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. I was excited about the neon signs, and then we have the Portland connection, and I knew Ebersole was a Lancaster County name, so
where I grew up in Akron, there's like 4 of us in the phone book, and in Lancaster, like we went to the Lancaster our dealer in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, like, can you give us one of your car license plates so we can have it? Because it's exciting. There's an Ebersole car dealer.
That's funny. We had First Friday at the Preservation Trust in Lancaster County this past Friday, and somebody came in and they were from Oregon, which was really funny, and they were just happened to be downtown, and they were like, "Is Hess a common name here?" I'm like, "Yes, Hess is a common name." They're like, "We knew one Hess, and we thought it was very unusual." Like, there are so many Hesses.
Yeah.
So tell me, what I know you talked a little bit about the house being burned and the control burn, but what drew you into preservation?
Yeah. I mean, I really think it was, as I look back, I kind of how I got interested in this. I mean, I think it was a lot of road trips. We never flew anywhere growing up, so hence my interest in kind of roadside architecture as well. I grew up in a place. There are great things about Akron. Is a fabulous city. The suburb that I grew up in has many positive attributes, but I certainly grew up not enamored with the bland sameness of what surrounded me, and I saw these excursions, these trips, as ways to really see places that were distinctive, as opposed to kind of chain stores and generic architecture I saw around me on a regular basis. So when I was in college doing my undergrad, I spent a summer living in Los Angeles. Thought it'd be fun. And I had enough knowledge in my brain that when you go to Los Angeles, you take Route 66, and had no idea
Oh my goodness.
what 66 was, other than this is an old road that you take when you go. So research it, and that trip was really transformative.
Oh, I'm sure.
Me.
Yeah.
Seeing,
I've driven on Route 66 in Arizona. It's like down through Flagstaff and Williams. But that's my experience of Route 66. It's not a long experience.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I highly recommend it to anyone. That we did it in about 8 days, and it was a transformative experience. And for me, it's an opportunity to see places that had such distinctive character, places that felt like the place that they were. And right. We said in preservation, some place and not in any place. And certainly I got that feeling. And I think that's really kind of what turned me on. So as I was, when I was spending my time working as an admissions counselor and realizing again that I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, and thinking through other options, thought my passion is doing something to preserve places that are really important to people, that make a place some place and not in any place. And I realized that I love walkable places, that the history, that the sense of character, a sense of place, is what makes places livable and interesting to me. And I think especially more so as my awareness has grown in the past 20 years or so since all of that transpired, an understanding of the kind of environmental necessity of preservation, that we're all taught reduce, reuse, recycle as children, and why on earth are we not doing that now? I remember thinking, why are we growing up? Why are we building all of this generic schlock out here on the farm fields when there are these incredible, beautiful, interesting buildings in downtown Akron that are sitting empty? We ought to be reusing them. And so that's kind of, for me, it was really about preserving places that are just significantly more interesting in a way that is environmentally sustainable.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think that that's one thing that preservation as a general movement needs to do better with. This is a green option. You don't have to build a new building that is certified green. Like, we're already reusing something. So I really agree with that.
Yeah, the greenest building is the one already built. We've been saying since at least the 70s.
Yes. I got one of those posters from the it doesn't say that specifically, but it's the National Trust poster. I think it's from 1980, that makes the building look like a gas can, and then talks about how many gallons of gas would be wasted if you demolish the building. So I found it online, and I was excited to get it.
Yeah, very cool. And I think the wider world and the architecture world is finally starting to catch on. And I see more and more news of architects, prestigious architects, saying we really can't afford to be building new buildings at this point, where we are in the environment, unless there's an absolute necessity.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to use what we have.
No, I agree with that. So tell me about the Landmark Trust USA.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super exciting. So the Landmark Trust USA, again, we're based here in southern Vermont, southeastern Vermont, Brattleboro. Say the one and only Brattleboro in the world. Towns named Brattleboro anywhere. But yeah, it's a very cool organization with a really unique model. So the mission of the organization is to preserve and restore historic properties through creative and sustainable uses for public enjoyment, education, and inspiration. So what does that look like on a practical level? Well, essentially, we use a model that was originated in the UK. There is an organization called the Landmark Trust in the UK, and another the Irish Landmark Trust that essentially is taking buildings of historic significance, restoring them using traditional trades. Here in the US, of course, we're doing everything according to the Secretary of the Interior standards, basically restoring at-risk buildings that don't have other options for sustainability, bringing them back to their original look and character, and then managing them as whole house overnight rentals. So whereas some places maybe the museum model is one way to preserve a historic place, and this model provides I think a really cool way for people to experience the history firsthand. There's certainly something I think special and different about being able to stay in a historic property and make it your home.
Yes.
Different from the experience that you would get at a museum. And we are a nonprofit, so there is still considerable fundraising that we do. But the model also allows the building to be preserved, but it provides regular income coming in that's able to take care of much of the kind of maintenance and overhead costs. So it's a sustainable model from a fundraising perspective, from a funding perspective, to keep older places around. So it's again buildings that exclusively buildings that have some kind of historic significance, restored, down to the most minute details. I mean, I really feel like it's kind of time travel, and I'm sitting in one of our homes now, and I'll talk more about the properties, but it's more than any other experience. You're not just visiting, you're staying in a place that is authentically of a different time. So there's this idea, even down to the artwork on the walls. We have an 1802 property. We're not going to have photographs on the walls because there was not photography at the time. So people, experiencing the time and place and understanding the mindset of the people who would have, built this property. And we, I know this conversation comes up in preservation often. We do at times, as situations warrant, keep changes that have occurred over time. I'm sitting now in the Sutton farmhouse property, which was at one point a home for some of our seasonal workers who work at a farm that we also own and manage. And so we have artwork behind us that was created in the 1980s, but helps to tell the special story of this place as well. So this idea, again, generally, when you're in the property, you're looking around, you want to be able to understand the time, know what time this place was built. So this is early 1800s, but forget that it's 2023.
I think that is definitely a way for people to experience, and I think that's really special, and what makes your program special, because I'm not aware of another one that does accurate restorations and then does short-term rentals in them.
Yeah, to my knowledge, we're the only national organization that has.
And I was going to ask, that's what I was going to ask you about. So you had mentioned in your introduction that it was a national organization. So how does that look nationally? Do you have properties rather not just in Vermont, or?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So we are currently only in Vermont.
Okay.
So the organization was originally, I mentioned the Landmark Trust UK. The Landmark UK originally came to the US in order to bring the model here for two of our properties, which we still manage. Nalaka and Kipling's Carriage House. Both of these properties were owned by Rudyard Kipling here in Vermont. And so initially for a few short years in the 1990s, it was the Landmark Trust UK, which now has over 200 properties around in Europe. But shortly thereafter, the Landmark Trust USA became a separate entity. So we are now currently a separate entity, or a separate nonprofit from the Landmark Trust UK. Have kept our properties to now here in southern Vermont. However, I'll mention that we are in the process of active negotiations with partners around. It is not, there is nothing limiting us here to Vermont, and we are actively working to bring the model elsewhere. Organizations contact us and say, we like this model. How can we bring this here to preserve places that we're interested in as well? So in the process of kind of active negotiations with partners, to bring this model to new properties, and currently kind of focusing on New England and Mid-Atlantic. And so kind of our kind of, again, partnership-based approach at this point is really centered on kind of working with like-minded preservation organizations, other statewide potential nonprofits or state and federal agencies to find properties where you might be able to expand.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a great way to allow people to experience it, but also, save the building. Because, and you mentioned that they were, mostly at-risk buildings. So I think that's a great solution. I think that it is.
Stewardship, we talk about it as a stewardship model, that this is a way to preserve buildings that would not necessarily have other options.
Right.
As we know, restoring historic buildings takes resources. And
it does, yeah.
One way to do that, and as I mentioned, we're a nonprofit. We're doing educational programming as well. We're doing fundraising for things like capital projects, restorations, and our education fund education work. But yes, but this model allows us to kind of keep the buildings in the kind of historic, condition that they need and deserve.
Okay, very good. So tell me about the properties that you have available for rent. I think the two that you mentioned that were the start were the ones that were dog friendly, because I noticed that when I was doing my research.
Well, actually, yeah. So these two aren't, those two initial ones aren't. We do have two that are dog friendly. But
okay, I guess one looked like a carriage house to me, so that's why.
Yeah, that's probably the sugar house. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Let me run through that. Yeah. So Nalaka is this was Rudyard Kipling's home. Many folks don't know, and I'll be honest, I did not either until I became better acquainted with the Landmark Trust USA. But Rudyard Kipling lived here in rural southern Vermont, in the small town of Dummerston, just outside of Brattleboro, for about 4 years, starting in 1892. His wife Caroline was from the area, and so essentially right after they got married, they moved here to Vermont and had this property built for their family. It was the only property ever built for Rudyard Kipling. It's obviously we associate Kipling with the UK and with India, but he did spend some very productive years here in Vermont and actually wrote the Jungle Books and a number of other of his more popular books here at Nalaka. And so Nalaka, his home, and the carriage house, which was the home of his carriage driver, Matthew Howard, and their family, are two properties that we have available for rent. Kipling was only here for 4 years, but some very productive years. He invented snow golf while he was here.
Well, I would think you'd have to in Vermont.
That's right. So he was introduced to golf. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, was a friend and came and visited and introduced him to golf. These are Nalaka is kind of our big property, 4 bedrooms there. The carriage house has 2 bedrooms, and they're always whole house rentals. And we don't have any TVs. Lots of great books related to Kipling. Enjoy the property. We do have Wi-Fi and modern conveniences, but no TV, so you can really take in the experience of the property. Yes, Nalaka just again can't be beat. The carriage house again, really, really beautiful. Restored building, both kind of overlooking the hills and the mountains. The Nalaka was designed to look like kind of a cross between a Mississippi riverboat and a Kashmiri houseboat from India, kind of a long, narrow, tall house on the hills, kind of Kipling saw it as riding the waves of the hills here in southern Vermont. So as you look out, it looks like you're kind of on an ocean of hills looking out over into New Hampshire from both of these properties. And we have a little museum there as well, in the old stables. His horses were named Nip and Tuck, and their stables. We have a little museum there as well. So that's our Kipling associated properties. And then our Dutton farmhouse is actually the original farmhouse for the Scott Farm, which is a large farm that we also own and manage. And so this is an 1849 farmhouse. We just were able to do some dendrochronology work on the house with some of our board members.
Very cool.
Last year, and kind of pinpoint that exact time, 1849. So a really beautiful kind of traditional New England farmhouse here that looks out over the heirloom apple orchard at Scott Farm, looks directly east. So you get this fantastic sunrise. That's a 4-bedroom property. And then the Sugar House and the Amos Brown House are our 2 dog-friendly properties. And the Sugar House, I think, might have been what you were seeing. So this is properties, buildings that look like this kind of throughout, especially Vermont and northern New England. These sugar houses are traditionally used for boiling maple syrup. So maple syrup, you tap the maple trees, you bring in all of this syrup usually into a large vat, and you boil that down into maple syrup. And that work is what happens in sugar houses, which are these kind of very distinctive looking wooden buildings. And so this sugar house was producing sugar for Scott Farm for a number of years, and it became one of our landmark properties in the early 2000s. And so now is a 1-bedroom, just about the Vermontiest place you can stay in Vermont. Some people have said if you smell hard enough, you can smell the maple syrup still in the wood from all those years.
I was wondering if it had like a caramely smell.
It's not overpowering. Beautiful property, completely restored and converted. So all of our other properties, began their life as homes. This one began its life as a sugar house and was converted into a rental property here. You can walk right down the street and still buy maple syrup from the trees that are surrounding the property at the sugar house that's just right beside our sugar house. So that's a fantastic play. We have a lot of couples, folks getting engaged. This is our only 1-bedroom property, so a romantic place to spend over some time in Vermont. And then our final property, and actually my favorite of the lot, is called the Amos Brown House. This is a property a little bit away from the others in kind of south central Vermont, in a town called Whitingham. This is an 1802 brick farmhouse with an attached wooden garage. You see lots of very distinctive type of architecture here in northern New England. House with attached garage, and just surrounded by acres and acres and acres of open land and woods. So it really, bird watching, and I just love the solitude of this place. It's this place to really kind of get away. It's a beautiful, again, brick, 4 chimneys, 1802 brick farmhouse. Has the large kind of stove or oven, brick oven that you would see from the time period. So it really is a neat property there. So those are the 5 overnight properties that we have. And then, as I mentioned, we also own and manage another property called Scott Farm. So Scott Farm is a working farm that has been in active production and cultivation since 1791. So certainly a property that has been doing what they've been doing for a long time, and I think really kind of aligned with our mission of preservation, that we're keeping alive the historic rural kind of farmstead environment. Most of our properties are on the National Register of Historic Places. Those that aren't, we're hoping to complete that work. Scott Farm is on the National Register. Nalaka is actually a National Historic Landmark. But our Scott Farm property, again, a number of historic buildings that date back to as early as the mid 1800s. So keeping that working landscape and those buildings alive, as well as keeping alive specific apple varieties, these
I was going
foods.
to ask about heirloom varieties. So you have specific ones.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah. And this was again new to me as well coming into the position. I knew my Granny Smiths and my Red Delicious, which people who know apples, there's nothing so delicious about Red Delicious. The commodity apples essentially. So Vermont is well known for good reason for a lot of heirloom and craft products. A lot of very small businesses doing kind of artisan products in Vermont. And so in that vein, we have 130 varieties of heirloom apples.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I had no idea there were 130 kinds of apples that existed. We are growing some incredible apples here on Orchard and some other ginger, pawpaws, all kinds of other interesting.
Oh, those are a big deal in Lancaster. I don't know if they were when you were here, but like that's like the native fruit tree to this area. So everybody's excited about it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. It's over 500 acres on the farm, and the part that's in cultivation is primarily heirloom apples, and Scott Farm is a certified B Corp. So we are also the owners of Scott Farm, and Scott Farm is a wholly owned subsidiary, essentially, of the Landmark Trust USA. So we at the Landmark Trust are a nonprofit and owners of Scott Farm, which is a certified B Corp, so benefit corporation focusing on people, planet, profit, yeah. So it's kind of an interesting relationship that we find is really well aligned with our mission, and so
right.
Many of our Vermont properties are kind of centered right here around Scott Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that's very interesting, and I do think that small scale agriculture it's really, we're losing it, but I think that's what at least in the Mid-Atlantic and the New England, that's what we've always had. I mean, in the Midwest, the farms are much bigger, but we've always had smaller farms here.
Yeah. And that space also, allows us to do cool, interesting things. I mean, another piece of our mission is promoting historic trade, promoting preservation trades, which I think any of us looking in preservation would acknowledge as one of the bigger challenges facing the field at the moment. People to really do the hands-on preservation work. So we see it's part of our mission to help advance the skills within the trades. And so there's an organization called the Stone Trust that uses some of our space at Scott Farm, and their mission is really to continue to advance the art and craft of dry stone walling. So this is something that if folks have been to, especially upper New England, but I know there's examples throughout Pennsylvania, traditional dry stone walls without mortar. And so the Stone Trust has little branches kind of throughout the country, but their main headquarters are kind of here at Scott Farm, in a way for us to continue to advance those preservation trades. And they're putting together awesome programs, throughout the year, and kind of certification classes to keep this skill alive. And then the space, also allows us to do interesting things. Like we can have weddings and events, and really engage with not just the wider community and folks who are coming to visit, our properties, who are coming from all over the world, but people in the local community as well. Of course, we try to do it at all of the properties.
And then do you have like apple picking and apple cider and things like that in the fall?
Yeah. This year has been tricky. This year there was a nasty freeze that got a lot of northern New England, and so lost a good bit of the crop this year. But plowing forward, and still doing a lot of the great things like we normally do. So we generally have a fruit CSA We have a little farm stand and a little cafe at the farm, and yeah, we're making hard cider, uh,
Oh,
wheat cider, and kind of a bubbly cider as well. So doing all kinds of fun things with apples, making our own products, and again featuring our products show up in jams that are made by local producers as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fun. And I don't think I saw on the website, I might have missed it, that you make hard cider, but hard cider is tasty. So that's another reason to come to Vermont.
Yeah, yes. Lots of good cider and beers and things in that non-alcoholic drinks, but lots of good artisan drinks of all
Yeah.
kinds.
Yes. So what are the trends and challenges that you see in preservation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much, and certainly this is something that any of us in the field, I think, could spend an hour just talking
Yes.
about these. But thinking, I mean, really, kind of distinctly about kind of the type of work that we're doing at the Landmark Trust
Yeah.
USA. Now, I know, one thing for this model that we have, again, that's really focused on restoring buildings of historic significance that don't have other viable options. And kind of the model is really based on kind of whole house rentals. So
Right.
as you know, there are questions that are coming up, discussions on zoning questions throughout the country on regulations around whole house rentals and these types of things. I think for this model to really be effective, I think one of the things that we're is kind of on our minds is ways to navigate this and make sure that municipalities and others implementing kind of zoning regulations understand kind of the value of this model as something separate from other overnight house rental
Right. Yeah.
trends that might be
I
out
agree. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean that's certainly something we're looking at our model
Mhm.
specifically. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think finding skilled workers to do this kind of work, the preservation trades,
Right.
is certainly something, and I really applaud the work that's been kind of spearheaded out of Maryland
Oh,
in
they're
the
doing a great job. Yeah.
trades development there. As I'd love to see neon added to that list of historic trades. But
I think they
no neon,
should. We
no
should start a
neon.
petition.
Yeah, but of course, we know that a real shortage of
Oh, yes. Yeah.
people who are qualified to do this kind of work and do it well. And then just thinking, marketing, I think, and more broadly, for us and for anyone, and it's of course my wheelhouse is the communications specialist, but not just here, anywhere in preservation. I think we have marketing challenges.
I
We
agree.
need to
Yeah.
make sure that the work that we're doing is relevant to the wider community. We have a history in preservation, I think, of appealing to a certain demographic of person, class, color, etc. And I think we are doing good work and need to continue to do good work to make sure that what we're doing is appealing to people beyond that traditional demographic without leaving anyone
No,
without leaving.
I agree. And something that I've noticed doing the podcast over the past several years is the trend towards telling a more inclusive story, because the stories have always been there. They just haven't been at the forefront, and it makes sense because the people who write the history books are the ones that get to dictate what is being taught. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so I definitely see that as a trend that is as has been for the past maybe 3 years, has really been picking up steam, and I think it's a good thing.
yeah,
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 I
absolutely.
do. I think that people, if they see themselves in the history, will care about the history, because if you don't see yourself, you don't, there's no reason to care about it.
Right, exactly. And I think a piece of that is recognizing the many ways that places can have historic significance. That
Right.
it's not, again, not just beautiful architecture or association with someone who fought a war or was a leader, but the
Right.
history of kind of every quote unquote everyday people and places that may may not look like much, but have really important stories that are contained within them, or places that haven't had the resources to keep their buildings,
Right.
at kind of top levels of integrity. And then, and the last thing that I want to make sure to mention, and I alluded to it earlier, is this idea of climate adaptation. I think I
Right.
mean, this is a major challenge right now. As I'm recording this, we are 2 days out from an enormous rain
I was
storm
going
here.
to ask if you were having flooding. I saw there was flooding in Vermont this morning on the news. And I didn't ask you that, but I meant to.
Yeah. So luckily, our properties and office have come through at this point unscathed.
Yeah.
But many places around Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, and other are suffered incredible damage. And this part of the country was hit very hard by Hurricane Irene in
Right.
2011. Montpelier, our state capital city here in Vermont, is under a number of parts of the city are underwater. So there's considerable damage, and this is certainly not unique to us. This is happening, of
Right.
course, on the coast. When I lived in Portland, there we have the major challenge of unreinforced masonry. All of these beautiful buildings that may not do terribly well in an earthquake that is probably going to hit the West Coast at some point
Right.
in the next 50 years. And so this question of kind of climate adaptation and resiliency, I think at this point we need to really be thinking about how do we adapt to do what we can to slow this climate change, but I would find out how we think through how we can adapt, because our buildings are continuing, and places are continuing to be affected, and it's not getting better anytime soon. So continuing to do that work and furthering the narrative. I think that one of the best ways to not stop it, to slow climate change, or we cannot be building new buildings at this point in our history when we have existing buildings that can be adapted. And I can go on and on about the benefits to the local economy and the environment from over reuse. Of course, we know many of those, but I think we really have an environmental imperative in preservation to talk more about the environmental benefits of reusing our existing building stock.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you. Was there anything that you wanted to share that maybe popped up in your mind as we were going through this, or that before we kind of do our wrap up questions?
Yeah. I mean, I think I got nothing specifically new. I mean, I'm excited to be able to share, this model with more people. As I really valued the time that I spent doing work in communities through national heritage areas and working with Milwaukee. It's a fabulous city, and doing primarily advocacy work there. And I think like this, if there's one thing to kind of that's kind of my passion with my current position here, it's really that this model is a really cool way, I think, a sustainable way to kind of keep always looking for how do we, and using the sustainable in this way, financially sustainable.
Right. You kind of, it helps to have both.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about preserving a building that nobody has wanted to preserve previously.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So this model, I think, is something that I think holds a lot of potential in the US. Again, there's over 200 properties at the Landmark Trust UK, and I think it's a great way, historic house museums that may be struggling. It's another tool in the toolkit in the US that we haven't used as much as I think we could, in a solution for buildings to kind of keep them up, and ways to do this kind of work. Funding anyone who's worked working in a preservation nonprofit, where the money comes from is something you spend a lot of time thinking about and working on.
Yes. Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah. The private sector is in that way a lot easier, because the people have bought the house, it's their property, they love it. But then to go in and try to save a building that's in danger of being demolished, and you have to convince people who really aren't into it, they don't want to spend any money, and you're trying to get them to come over to your side, is a lot harder.
Yeah, and then more than that, sometimes people don't know that they have a historic property and show up between
Right.
a design review board or a preservation commission, and they're told, you're going to have to replace all of that stuff, and we don't have any money to help you. And again, that's
Right.
worst case scenario. Oftentimes there is money and resources, and ideally.
Yeah. Oh no, I think you muted yourself. Oh, I don't know what happened. Let me see if I can. Um, I don't know what happened. You muted yourself for like 30 seconds.
Oh, am I back now?
You're back. I was trying to figure out if I could unmute you, but I couldn't figure it out.
Okay. Yes. Anyway, speaking of, yes, the preservation. If we can change the culture around the value of old
Correct.
buildings, increase the carrots, then that makes the sticks less necessary.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It is yeah, it is hard when people don't, they don't value its importance, but it's being imposed. I mean, that there's a definite tension there, that public private ownership, of property, and how much restriction can you put on it. But I do think that those ordinance tools that we have, that we can kind of enforce, are one of the first steps that people can do to make sure that their community is preserved, because that's really the only tool you have is local preservation ordinances at a very local level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this question, it always surprises everyone. Not in front of it's the local level. Your national register nomination or designation is not going to protect that building. We saw this in Milwaukee. Milwaukee had a relatively strong historic preservation ordinance. The majority of the suburbs surrounding it did not. And so when somebody wants to buy the beautiful 1920s mansion on Lake Michigan in one of the suburbs, and they knock it down, and everyone's upset, there's not so much we can do.
You can't go in and stop them. Yeah,
we can try to change public opinion, but there's no tools in that to kind of rally around or cause enforce delays. And so yes, those ordinances are key to saving places at the local level.
Yeah, I agree. It's not surprising though.
All of us in the preservation nonprofit world, I think.
Yes. So how can someone support the work of Landmark Trust USA?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. We obviously, I mean, the two big ways are really come and visit us if you need as if you need an excuse for a Vermont vacation, but now you have an extra one. Just come and stay at our properties. I mean, the prices for the properties are really quite reasonable. You're not paying any more, especially if you're filling the buildings.
Yeah, that's true.
Capacity, you're not paying any more than you would at a Hampton Inn or a similar property, and getting a whole lot more value, I think, than you would at any kind of a chain hotel or motel. Yes. So please come and visit us in southern Vermont. Again, we're just outside of Brattleboro and Whitingham. Brattleboro is a fantastic, artsy, small community, about 14,000 or so here in southern Vermont, and a good gateway to lots of places around us. So come and visit us, and then again, we are a nonprofit. So as any nonprofit fundraiser says, when they have an opportunity, please donate to us and help keep this mission going. Again, we depend on donations to fund our capital projects and kind of educational programs and plans to kind of bring this model to other places. So of course, all of that can be done online, and of course, reach out to us if there are questions that you have about the model. Again, we generally have to be, we're a small organization of only a handful of people, so we're obviously quite selective about the types of properties that we're able to bring on, but would obviously love to be able to share with others about this model. So encourage folks to come visit us, stay at the properties, help us continue the work through your donation and reach out.
Okay, very good. And then how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah. So for the organization, I'll say, and then myself, the organization, we're at landmarktrustusa.org, and also on the key social medias. So Facebook and Instagram. We have an email list. For me personally, you can reach out at jebersole, jebersole at landmarktrustusa.org, or you can find me on my own Instagram. I'm at Jeremy the Ebersole, THE in the middle, and I have lots of pictures of mostly neon signs and roadside architecture and such on there. Would love to talk with anyone about Landmark Trust or neon or any of these other topics. LinkedIn as well is a good place to.
Okay. Very good. And I will make sure that we have I'll make sure that when this gets posted on our website, so if somebody's listening, they didn't get a chance to write it down, they'll be able to go on and see all of the resources that you provided. And then they can just click through or whatever they need to do to get in touch with you or to visit the website.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on today. I appreciate your time, and I enjoyed learning about your organization.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.